All right. Welcome, Wolf. Welcome to the NT podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Can you share your background with our audience, please?
Sure. I'm a software engineer my whole life, actually. I was born and raised in Germany, did all my education there. And then like 23, 24 years ago, I moved to the US. And for the last 9 years, I worked for Intuit. Intuit is known in the US very much for our TurboTax product, which allows people to file their taxes online. And also we have QuickBooks, which is an accounting software solution for small and medium-sized business. So in that, you can imagine there's a 9,000 employee company operating worldwide, and we got into voice user interfaces, conversational user interfaces a long time ago, actually.
When did you start with that?
I started when I was 1 year at Intuit. So that is now 8 years about.
Oh, wow.
8 years ago, we started looking into this. And I have the fortune to not have to work on a particular of our products. I work in a group that we call Intuit Futures. And so we have a team of engineers, designers, and we look into problems, into areas, into technologies that may help or hurt our products in years to come. So we started experimenting with voice user interfaces even before the Amazon Echo came out.
All right.
Siri was really a thing that kind of inspired all of us, right? So we looked into Siri, we thought, wow, imagine what would happen if Apple would open that up. If our customers could start talking to our products. And so we started experimenting around that. And as we all know, that never happened. Apple was never open, allowing other companies into this ecosystem. And so our first platform to really experiment with voice was Android. So we built small apps, and users could just use the Android phone and then started talking like, so we started things with very, very, very basic stuff, account balances. What's the balance of my checking account? And what's the stock quote for BAC, Bank of America? So we started really with ticker symbols. We didn't even recognize the full name of the company. And all this was done with like the very, very crummy speech recognition at the time. And the speech synthesis was not really where it is today, right? So it sounded very, very robotic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we experimented with handing users the phone and say, oh, let's capture your receipt data. So our small business people, they walk into a store and come out with, let's say, a bucket of paint. They are contractors. And so the idea was to use this to capture receipt data for there later to be fed into their accounting system. And
how does it work? Like you say some keywords and then the system will do the action at that
That's
time.
right, yeah. So we used very basic speech recognition for it, and without the more sophisticated intent recognition we have today. However, the result was that everyone who was using this really hated it.
Why is that?
So that's, it's very interesting. Sometimes you have an idea in mind and you start implementing it. You start really putting in the software components together. You hand it to people and then they don't like it, which also means you didn't do your homework, right? We could have done this much simpler with maybe some fake prototypes. What we figured out is that voice user interfaces are really terrible when it comes to data collection.
Okay.
Right? And so if you think about it, it has to do with ambiguities like names. If you wanted to enter an address, your friend's name, your friend's phone number, your friend's email address into an application using your voice, imagine how hard it is to recognize an email address correctly. right?
I see.
Or names are spelled so differently.
Yeah.
And so you start in correcting the system all the time. And even if the recognition works very well, it's still, now your solution has to confirm it. Is that how you spell it? Did I hear you correctly? So it's a very long and cumbersome process. So that's one of the learnings that we had out of this is, voice solutions, voice user interfaces are really not great at data collection. So that was one of the initial learnings. And then we thought, whoa, this is like a kind of a wake-up call for us. We really had a few engineers working on this for a couple of weeks to build the solution. And then, like I said, we were not really successful with that. So then we started looking much closer into what are good and what are not so good use cases for voice user interfaces. And so another learning that came out of that was that most of the solutions that are delightful to users are where it's either 50-50 or where the voice user interface talks longer than the user. And if you, now I have to mute her here. The Alexas are all around me, obviously. And so if you think about the most successful use cases for an Amazon Echo, for instance, are play that song for me, right? Play my favorite song. And so it's a very short command.
Timers, which is my favorite.
And then you have things like, Alexa, what's the weather?
Yeah.
Right? That's very popular. Again, very short. And now we probably trigger all the Alexas of the whole audience here.
Yeah, I was just checking my Alexa device. Hopefully it doesn't trigger it.
So a very short request triggers a longer answer, right? The answer will be the current weather, and then she gives a pre-forecast for the rest of the day. Another very, very often used thing is Alexa set a timer, right? Very useful, but again, very short in nature, and then comes a longer response. So that was one of the things where I say, okay, it has to be kind of short, or the answer at least needs to be as long as the question. So if we transfer this into kind of our domain, a solution would be like, what's the balance of my checking account? And maybe you give that balance, but then you may add a little bit of more information to that. Maybe you tell the last transaction as well, or why is the balance so high or so low? Give a little bit more color. So that is what again was one of the initial learnings. Make it conversational by talking more than the customer talks. Talk a little bit longer. And
it's so counterintuitive. Like in all conversation, usually you should let the other person talk more than you, right? And this is kind of the other way around.
So that was, and like I said, it came all about this initial failure, basically. By failing with the first prototype we built, we then went back and said, okay, let's get some principles straight before we go deeper into this. So that was very, very interesting to find out what people find delightful with conversational user interfaces. And another thing is really listen carefully to how people respond. And so one of the ideas is how you could measure how good your voice user interface is do people say thank you at the end, right? So are they polite? Are they, and so I think you can really, if you look at log files or if you look at recordings, you will find out if the thing that you built, is it a delighter? Do people appreciate it? And
how do you detect that?
You can get log files, right? Especially if you are in an initial phase where, so maybe talk a little bit specific now to what the ecosystem that Amazon has built. So you can build prototypes and you can let users up to 500 actually test that. So before going public, you can invite up to 500 users, send them an email, tell them how to find and install or activate that skill. And you have a lot more freedom doing this. You don't have the rigor, for instance, that you need to have when you go really public with a skill, right? So there's not that many rules during this initial beta phase. Yeah. So it's that time when you really want to iron out most of the problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think very interesting to do this and compare it to chatbots. Right, most of your audience are probably more focused on text-based chat.
Yeah, more the interface part. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably a little bit of problem in the whole industry, that we are confusing when we talk about conversational user interfaces. Yeah. Everyone thinks primarily of chatbots, and so and chatbots are well, it's text-based, and text versus voice user interfaces. There really is a huge difference.
And do you see any scenarios that you can combine both?
There's attempts to that everywhere, right? You see many chatbots that have the little microphone in the corner, where people could click the microphone for a data entry instead of typing.
Yeah.
And so that there is a little bit of integration there, but most chatbots will not respond with voice, right? They will just give you text, and some give you icons, and some even are so restricted in a way, so limited, that you don't have many choices. It's more like a decision tree. You start the conversation, and then you just see 2 or 3 buttons how to continue in your conversation.
Yeah.
So that becomes more like what we used to call an IVR, right?
True.
So IVRs, I don't know if everyone understands the acronyms. It's interactive voice response. That are those systems that when you call your bank or your insurance, and then you press or say 1 for this and press or say 2 for the other option. And as we all know, people really hate these systems. And you want to make sure that you don't replicate an IVR when you create a chatbot. And it's a tricky situation in a way when you limit users in their options.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, like in which type of use cases do you see maybe voice interfaces excel better than chat or text-based interfaces?
Well, I think that, and maybe I'm alone with that opinion, but I think that the chatbot experience will just fade away.
All right.
And for me, chatbots are the blackberries of our time.
Okay.
So remember blackberries? Those were the predecessor of our current phones, right? They had keyboards, physical keyboards, where you had to really click to write. They were very limited, but it were basically machines that allowed you to read and write email. And at the time, we could not really imagine that people would want to touch their screens, right? So this is like, you said, what is this? It's all smudgy, and how do I keep it clean? And do you have to wipe it all day? So when the suggestion came first out that Apple is building a phone and the whole screen is a touchscreen, there are no keyboards on it. Mm-hmm. We thought these guys are nuts, right?
Yeah.
And so now I think the chatbots we are in this phase where we're transitioning from the traditional user interfaces to more conversational user interface. But for me, conversation means something that we currently do. A conversation means a face-to-face voice interaction. You don't really have a good idea of how this conversation continues. And this is what makes a lively conversation.
Yeah.
If I just put 2 or 3 buttons on the screen, this replicates for me in IVR. So I think chatbots like we currently see them is a transitional phase towards a much more open voice
so you
user
would
interface.
envision like ultimately most chatbots in the end will either fail or transition towards a voice-based interaction.
That's right, yes.
Okay, that's a very strong statement here.
I know.
And in your case, what do you see like still as some of the main challenges for voice interfaces to take the next step? Because I'm not seeing a lot of voice text yet, right? So what do you believe would require us to go to the next level?
I think an like real new platform, like when we transitioned from let's go back to this like old example when we transitioned from, and you and most of your audience is probably much too young to remember, but there was a thing before the mouse, right? We had just a keyboard to communicate with the computer.
The command line, right?
You were using cursor keys to move a cursor up and down.
Yeah.
And the cursor could only travel like 80 positions from left to right and 24 positions up and down. So then came along the high resolution graphical monitors and a mouse. So that allowed us then finally to do the graphical user interface that we all use today. So a huge shift. And then we transitioned to, many years later, we transitioned to tablets and phones using touchscreens. But see, it's a whole new hardware platform. Most of us have not yet put touchscreens on their laptops or on their desktop machines. So I think that some of the technology travels not backwards. And I see the same as voice. So voice is a whole new platform. We already see, and it deserves a whole new hardware platform as well. And those are the smart speakers. And so I don't necessarily see that voice will transition back to your laptop and desktop for usage. The same way, like the touchscreen didn't really travel back. Like it's for most of us, it's probably cumbersome to touch the screen. Like you get fatigue in your arms, and and maybe the same is true for your like office space where you sit and work. It's probably not. You don't want to talk to your machine all day. It's probably tiring, and it takes a long time. Most of us type faster than we speak, and the recognition is always spot on if you don't mistype a word. So that's that. However, in areas where, like the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, where we see the smart speakers, they are the most frictionless conversation or interaction with the machine you can have is voice. You just walk into a room and start speaking. So there is a component which we haven't touched yet. The frictionless way to get to information is so essential for the success of the smart speakers.
And what do you see as the potential of the smart? How do you say that? The micros, like the AirPods of the world, you know? Do you see them as a potentially good fit for voice text?
It's a little bit more a niche because you now have to, again, equip yourself with hardware. And it's not, some people may have them in their ears all day. That's a different story. But it's...
I see it all the time, by the way.
If you have them in your ears all day, it's kind of, you have your smart speaker with you all day in a way, right? It's you have and it comes with the benefit that only you hear the response. So it takes a little bit of this privacy concern out of the equation, which is definitely a benefit. Still, the number one reason for the success of smart speakers is the frictionless access to information. Not to have to see this phone sits here and does nothing currently, so I have to unlock it.
Yeah.
Face ID or Touch ID. Imagine you're out and about. Most of the time here now, you have to wear a face mask.
Yeah.
Face ID doesn't work all that well.
Yeah.
So you now start and fiddling with your phone. You have to type in your 6-digit key to unlock it. Then you have to swipe up and down to find the app. You open the app. Now, if it's a financial app, again, you have to identify yourself. And then again, you start swiping around. So it takes a little bit of time to get to the information that you need.
Okay.
With the smart speaker, it's just there. So that is a real benefit. It's not as precise most of the time. And you don't want it to be precise. Like if I say, what's the balance of my checking account? Don't give me the cents, right? Just give me the dollars. Mm-hmm. So there's, so there's kind of a rounding that's going on, right? And so you get the rounding error. It's not as precise. And it's very bad at reading your lists, right? Mm-hmm. You say,
if you have too many elements, right?
That's right. Yes. So there is
most offense.
Absolutely. So one of the not so delightful use cases is going through a list of things on these voice user interfaces. Absolutely.
Maybe one critical question I want to make to you and maybe to your company as you're working for Intuit is like, as your main service is helping people with their financial services, right? Do you imagine people using the solution like in their living room or wherever those voice tech is?
Yes, I really do.
Okay.
And so this always comes up, right? Privacy and security always comes up with voice. And we as an industry absolutely have to address this issue. Mm-hmm. One of my hopes is that out of the current situation, voice biometrics becomes better and more popular. So it's very accepted now to use your fingerprint to unlock your phone. It's also very accepted now to use your Face ID, so your face recognition to unlock your phone. Where we currently did not have really good success is using your voice. Yeah. And there are companies that are good at that, companies that have solutions for that. And I could see that as a very good solution to address privacy and security issues on these smart speakers. So for instance, we already have user identification with smart speakers. That's just, user identification just means that the solution, the system can differentiate between family members. Yeah. So it knows if the mother, the father, the kids are in the room and talking to the device. That's not voice authentication, right? Where we really want to authenticate a user to an account. So I hope that out of all, like I mentioned, currently with face masks, Face ID is really not all that good. And Touch ID might also not work everywhere. Like we are discouraged from touching surfaces. Yeah. And so that could be the big chance currently for voice biometrics to come in. So that could help us with making systems more secure, only allowing you to access information to certain accounts if the user has been authenticated. Now, if you live in a place where you have many visitors all the time, and so that's probably an issue. I would agree with that. Then you have your Alexa on your coffee table. Everyone has access to it, and yeah, you probably don't want to have a device like that with access to your bank accounts in that situation. But I don't know. I don't have that many people coming to my office here. So I have a home office, and it's my wife that is in the room all the time. But we don't have many people to come here.
Depends a lot on the type of person and wherever they put their smart speakers.
Yes.
Like if they have
Absolutely.
a studio, then it's easier for them to interact with it because
yeah,
not a lot of people will be in the same studio room. So yeah, and I think that's a very excellent way to wrap up our NT podcast. We have gone too far beyond the 10-15 minutes limits here, but I think some of the things you mentioned is like so interesting that we must go into such detail to really understand the nuances behind it. So again, really appreciate your time here. And once we have the whole recording ready, we will share it publicly and I will share it with you as well. All right.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.